I think because we've basically said it's too close to the call, we should at least have what's going to happen. We should probably lay out the apocalyptic scenario that what happens if Trump wins. So let's move on to that, shall we? Trump has talked about ending the war on day one by cutting off aid to Ukraine in order to force Zelensky to negotiate and hand over the Donbass. This would be, in effect, an act of appeasement towards Putin, but as Timothy Snyder has said, the Ukrainians would still have to continue fighting for independence, and all this would do is make the Ukrainians more likely to lose. In my opinion, this would signify an American retreat from Eastern Europe, leaving the EU and the UK, hopefully with the support of other allies like South Korea, Canada, and Australia, to continue the struggle. The thing is, if this is the case and the US does retreat and we win, the US becomes irrelevant in European politics, and maybe Macron will get his dream of an independent European defense and foreign policy. And the effect of Trump becoming an isolationist is that America becomes irrelevant in Europe. Trump has also repeatedly threatened to leave NATO. Commentators are saying often doubt whether he really would do it, but they can probably would pull out the 100,000 American troops that are currently stationed in East and Central Europe, which acts as a deterrent. And Trump is basically also planning on turning the 2% GDP target into a membership fee, which would violate Article 5 of NATO by saying that the US would not defend an ally who couldn't meet that target at the moment, which would include Germany at the moment, where the US have nuclear weapons based. So what does that mean for any sort of defense policy?
No, well, I mean, mind you, Germany is increasing its military spending. I mean, we'll see how Olaf Scholz does next year. Who comes in if he survives. I guess one thing horrible about that scenario is that, well, I guess Macron becomes more important in Europe, and that's also a nightmare. I want to avoid. But with someone whose bar is lower.
AFD.
Or having the AFD, and which is a nightmare I don't want to contemplate really, but look out for. I mean, I would just like to add on to this. I mean, look, if America withdraws, if they cut off funding, the funding will come on to Europe and European countries in the European Union, which will have a cost on the people and will have knock-on effects as well. We've already seen some of that happen. We've seen in Australia, not in Europe, in Austria, with the far right party really getting into power.
Austria is not in NATO, so that's not the best example.
Not in NATO, but they're in Europe. They still have influence. It spreads as part of possibly as part of a wave, right? I mean, there are. So you might have an increase in disenfranchisement with the costs of supporting Ukraine, which could be really, it become a European burden. Now, moving on to the Middle East, which is the other big front of American foreign policy, and obviously we know Trump's opinions on Israel and Gaza and the Palestinian occupied territories and Lebanon and all of that. He's the one who moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and there is no doubt that he will continue in the same vein, but maybe a lot more. If anything, there is a danger that he would actively seek to escalate with Iran. I mean, he is the one who called the assassination on Qasem Soleimani back in the day, and this is a second opportunity. I mean, this is the closest Iran and Israel have been in an open conflict. I mean, missiles are
landed since the revolution. Basically, since the revolution.
Basically since the Iranian Revolution in '79, and you putting Trump. Putting Trump in this situation is like smoking next to an oil drum, it's
quite literally.
The place is fucking full of it. For the Palestinian people, for the Lebanese people, this can only be a bad thing. For the Yemeni people as well, you're looking at a lot more probably strong and active American support in that one, and we'll see how that impacts on the European things. We'll see.
I also think a Trump administration would be less likely to support the UN versus when Israel, starts attacking the peacekeepers. And so basically the whole world security apparatus becomes less stable with Trump in charge of America.
I mean, arguably the well, security. I mean, America has not taken any good care of the of that apparatus at all. I mean, the Biden who's in, he's hawk.
I mean, Biden's put the foot down on Ukraine,
Yeah, but
but he's
that's
basically
one
followed
thing.
the same.
But it's very different people when it comes to Ukraine. You know, we must respect the right to exist, their independence, blah blah blah. The war, and then you talk about Palestinians. For him, they're not important. He is a big Israeli hawk, and we'll see. We'll have to see how sort of the feelers at the moment from Harris is that she might not be. I mean, she's verbally had sort of slightly different views on the situation than Biden. There could be a bit more of a chance of her putting a bit more pressure on Israel. How that would turn out, literally, it would be. Would
Well,
it?
the thing is,
Love to see how
it's
that
not
happens.
possible in America to be an anti-Israeli politician because one of the squad members, I think Corey Bush, lost her primary seat because the pro-Israeli super PAC, AIPAC, basically put $8 million into the Democratic primary against her because she criticized the
Yeah,
situation in Gaza.
which is
And
a
so,
disgusting act of censorship, frankly, of an elected politician, and this is the environment that Kamala Harris is operating in. I
and Joe Biden, to be fair,
And Joe Biden, yeah, well, except it's different because
it's
Joe
not.
Biden does generally 100% believe in all of this stuff. I mean, he's been consistently backing Israel all the way. He's been consistently a big hawk on Israel all the way since the 80s.
But the problem is that he's been in the Senate since before the Yom Kippur War in '73, when Israel was actually under threat from outside forces.
Yeah, well, I mean, they're also Israel's been the biggest military power there for a long time because of its because of its backing of America.
I think it also has
I think
nukes
it's
and
not
then
overstate Israelis' sense of Israelis' smallness in the region.
by the way, we've talked about foreign policy a lot. We don't want to delve too much into Israel, Palestine, and Middle East because we're already apparently an hour into this video. Moving on from foreign policy, we're going to talk about what's going to happen domestically if Trump gets into power. We can talk about Project 2025 and all the things that are in there, which Trump has supported. And I mean, the guy, he says he isn't supporting it, but the guy who wrote the prologue for it was J.D. Vance. So if Trump doesn't know J.D. Vance, I think the Republican ticket's in a bit of trouble. So on top of the president, one of the things that's in there is he is going to rip out the top ranks of civil service and replace them with loyalists by using the Vacancies Act. And usually the president gets to appoint about 4,000 people in 3 million out of civil service, but this would allow him to appoint more like 50,000, and any real opposition in government would basically be removed for him.
Yeah, I mean, this is Trump making sure that his project, or even more than rather, it's people behind Project 2025, making sure that their political agenda is there to stay, no matter if Trump would lose the next election, or the Republicans somehow lose out of power at the other end of 4 years. After this, I mean, this is make or break. I mean, this would change uh, for a long time the makeup of the civil service, of the administrative branch of the government, and that could have major impact.
There's also to consider is freedom of assembly. So while some people might say that Trump is all bluster, we know from Mark Esper, who was Secretary of Defense in 2020, that Trump wanted to use the army to clear Black Lives Matter protesters and gave an order to shoot protesters in the knees. At that point, Esper threatened to resign, and so did Mark Milley, who is the Joint Chief of Staff. So Trump backed down because it would look bad if both his top defense officials resigned for the election. This time around, Trump is going to appoint yes men as a yes man as Secretary of Defense. More broadly, Trump has discussed sending the military into American cities to quell protests.
And well, we can only imagine how that would go down. I mean, the likelihood of a major protest campaign happening under Trump it's high, frankly, because of the attitude he will bring into the country, and there will be a movement, and well, if he's got no one at the top to tell him no, we'll have another Putin situation where so no one will tell him not to do something, he'll and things will escalate. There is a massive chance of escalation of something really bad happening in those 4 years, and so
which will, of course, eventually lead to a conflict between the state governments in which these big cities, which will protest, reside, and the federal government. Which, again, I'm not saying this will result in anything like succession, but it will
No.
make the country incredibly dysfunctional, and
No,
there
yeah.
will be lots of real conflict between the state and federal government.
Yeah,
which
it
will
would not be pretty. So, well, there's also the impact of a Trump presidency on the rule of law. Now, Trump has made it clear that he would direct the Justice Department to prosecute his political opponents. Aspects of Project 2025 talk about gutting the FBI and pulling it out of the Justice Department and have it report directly to the White House. Broad immunity that the Supreme Court granted the president this year effectively shielded Trump from prosecution for actions taken in office. The Trump for the United States means that a president can't be prosecuted for official acts, a term that has not been clearly defined. Supreme Court is going to be very unlikely to limit him, nor will they be willing to, considering their makeup at the moment. And any retirement or death in the court under a Trump administration would secure the conservative control of the court for decades to come. Unless they can, unless the House and Representatives can somehow impeach the corrupt justices that currently reside on there.
There's only one, though. That's the problem.
Well, it's careful.
But Thomas Clarence is the guy who's getting bribed by people to.
Oh yeah, like clearly being bribed. There is no doubt. Like there is a paper trail and everything. But
and like his wife, his wife was like literally part of the MAGA crowd who was going after, who was trying to like overturn the election. Like,
yeah. So you can imagine what Trump would be able to get away with having a secured, with having a secured Supreme Court, with having a secured legislative branch, with. That is extremely dangerous president, and it's not even Trump really. You're looking at JD Vance and people that come along with him who will be there to stay as well. It's Trump-like politicians and people who will carry on that Project 2025 or even take it in a more extreme way. The only likely check on Trump would be the legislature, if they survive, assuming that at least one house is controlled by the Democrats. But barring a supermajority in both houses, Trump can veto any law designed to restrain him. And it's a supermajority is unlikely in such a close.
Project 2025 has also made it quite clear that the Trump administration would abandon fighting climate change and focus on energy security over like solar panels or wind farms or nuclear power, which would, considering the size of the US economy, would basically doom the whole planet.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
And that's not me being like hyperbolic. Like that would guarantee us like 2% global warming.
I mean, we're already on course.
2 degrees.
We're already on course.
No, but we're already above 1. That's the thing. We've already passed 1.
Yeah, and it's not going to go down anytime soon. In America being the economy that it is, having being the manufacturing state that it is, it's major problems there. We could be seeing a Trump presidency and a stepping down from that sort of leadership role. Would see states like China sort of potentially stepping up. The European Union would have to step up, and we'll be seeing an interesting possible reorientation of leadership on issues, on fundamental issues like climate change.
Okay. So Trump would attack women's civil liberties by removing FDA approval for a pill used for abortions within the first 70 days, and he would ban abortion medication being sent through the post by using a 19th century law called the Comstock Act. And he would not need an act of Congress to do either of these things. He has the ability to do this from day one. Project 2025 would also turn the federal government into a transphobic institution by suing schools that protect trans rights. And he's also talked about withdrawing Medicaid funding for everybody to hospitals that provide gender affirming care.
I also reading going on there. You can also look at Broadway 2025 on the Heritage Foundation's website if and it's fairly long, the whole document, but I believe they also mention withdrawing sort of protected characteristics from civil servants.
Oh yes.
Which means you can if you're an ethnic minority, if you're a sexual or gender minority, well, guess what? Your federally your federal protective characteristics are removed. You can be booted out of a job because of how you look or who you are.
The irony is that they still have to follow their international human rights treaties obligations, but the Supreme Court has
Do they
basically
have
always
to?
ignored them anyway. So
Yeah.
you know,
I mean, Supreme Court being full of Republicans and very ultra conservatives. Look, America. When has America followed international human rights law? if it hasn't served them
yeah,
anything,
Guantanamo Bay with its enhanced interrogation techniques, with America
Yeah,
signing the CAT treaty is,
yeah.
convention against torture.
Yeah. Under at this point, we're gonna have enhanced interrogation techniques in the White House. At this point, I mean, like purging the civil service.
Anyway, we've been talking about this for quite a long time. We've covered who we think is going to win the election, and then what happens if Trump wins. We're going to keep this fairly short because if we do any longer, you won't have time to watch the whole thing before the election happens. I won't have time to edit it. But it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Please do watch the whole thing.
Yeah.
We can be entertaining.
Yeah, sure. Well, if they've got this part, they have already watched the whole thing, Charla. But thank you guys very much, and we hope to see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.